the system. Well, today it's my pleasure to have the professor John Kofas. His specialization is international political economics, and he worked in the Department of Sociology, History, and Political Science in Indiana University, Kokomo from 92 until 2005. That's correct.
Yes.
He is the author of several books, but I highlight two books. Links on Shame, that narrates of the decay of American society, started in the 80s. In my opinion, it started in the 70s, but it's more evident in the 80s. And the last book is Neoliberalism, Inequality, Authoritarianism. Right? But today,
Yes.
I invited him to talk about American economy because there are several facts that have, revolved. It's like a special revolution in America now when Trump is at the desk. Very different aspect from the Democrat Party and the Democrat policies, quite different. Anyway, let's talk about fiscal policy, John, because one of the issues in American economy is the debt ceiling and the government spending. And my question is, how sustainable is the current trajectory of the use debt? And what are the potential consequences of the future debt ceiling debate or government shutdowns? Because that is quite important for them.
Yes, that is an issue that has concerned everyone from Wall Street analysts to obviously academic scholars, economists, and journalists as well. The fact is that debt to GDP ratio in the United States right now is 126%. IMF, World Bank projected to rise much faster in the next 10 years. If Congress passes the GOP essentially a Trump-inspired proposal for tax reductions of 4.5 trillion. This will send the debt much higher, and one of the reasons that GOP congressional leaders have proposed raising the debt ceiling by 5 trillion. This would send it over 40 trillion. And floating bonds, obviously, will mean that it will have an impact on the currency, which is, of course, the world's most used reserve currency, the hard currency that's used mostly in the world. I have read quite a bit about the shutdown of the government. You mentioned shutdown of the government. Okay. Republicans right now are saying, well, the Democrats just can't wait to come in there and embarrass us, blaming us for essentially making us feel responsible for raising the debt ceiling. And they're going to press the issue so that it appears to the public, to the American people, that we are the ones, we are the Republicans controlling, obviously, the House, the Senate, and the White House, that we're the ones responsible because they're in leadership, although they're the ones who are not going to go along and force us to shut it down. I honestly have serious reservations. Historically, Wall Street stops the White House and Congress from shutting the government down. I just don't know if it could take place, but my money, if I had to bet, I would bet that Wall Street is going to intervene and stop them. It's just too unsettling for the markets, and especially at this point. I don't think that is sustainable. I do think right now, because the European Union has such huge problems, as well as Japan, by the way, I think the G7 have their own problems. So the dollar actually, looking at it from here, from where I am in Europe, looks kind of okay for now. But long term, I just don't think this is sustainable. The debt is sustainable, and it is going to undermine the currency, and that has inflationary impact. That has
Yes,
an
because
impact in
my
the.
question regarding that aspect, you say, well, Trump wants to cut taxes, right? And to cut spending. But you have a big debt. It's not easy that, that's the reason that you say that it's not sustainable. But that will have an impact, in social programs, inflation, economic growth. Because it's going to be easy, okay? Because you have a big burden on your economy with the debt and the interest and everything.
Yeah, I subscribe to John Maynard Keynes' theory about debt in general,
Right.
and that is there's good debt and there's bad debt.
Exactly.
Good debt is when you invest in the productive sector of the economy, and it's an investment in the future for future growth of the economy, and it's not. Again, going back to Keynesian economics, it's not vertical growth, economic growth, meaning that the same sectors and same companies keep growing, very few, but it's horizontal economic growth, which means it's across the board, and there is social development comparable to what China has been doing, by the way, which has been strengthening social development along with economic growth and increasing consumer spending. Again, Keynesian economics, increasing consumer spending to stimulate further horizontal economic growth. This the model that the United States is following, the financialization under the neoliberal economy, is a model based on speculative investments, showing the highest profit possible on the quarterly reports for the largest companies, and it leaves behind the smaller operators. The fact is, there have been a lot of closings since COVID-19. A lot of even chains, restaurant chains, retailers have more. By the way, more are projected. Wall Street Journal has an article out. More are projected to close this year, 2025. So I don't see. Okay, they're borrowing. What are they borrowing for? When you have 1.2 trillion. Of the U.S. budget going to pay interest on the debt.
That's what I say.
And then you have 1 trillion, close to 1 trillion for defense. You have a problem because the whole budget is just under 7 trillion. So you have more than 2 trillion going for interest on the debt and defense. This is parasitic spending. So that's what I mean. This is bad debt. Going back to the Keynesian theory, this is not constructive. This is not going forward.
The only solution is the solution that they have applied for several years, where it begins with Nixon, is to print money, right? I see what I say as a political, as economic investigator.
I agree. Yeah.
But what happened? Well, they are a big economy. They're a big country, right? As you say, the currency used is the dollar worldwide. So the Democrat Party, the policy is to create wars in order to take all the money created outside, not to have inflation. Now Trump is against war, right? He's trying to cease the fire in several places. For that reasons, when I heard the news, 2 weeks ago, that he wants to own Gaza Strip, and I said, what
Yes.
is that? Well, the solution is, let's take the whole money created here outside and rebuild Gaza, the Gaza Strip. in order to take the whole scene side, the birds outside. So the whole bubble bursts outside and not here. That's the only solution. It was happening in Ukraine and several countries. Well, they are devastated. Let's take investment outside. We print money and we create it because I don't see other options available.
Yeah, that I agree with you, Marco. You mentioned Gaza. He wants to create.
Several places. I told you about Gaza because it was the first thing that the guy said on the news, right?
Yes. He also put on the table a proposal that the Ukrainians were. Gaza is one area. The United States needs rare earth minerals. The fact is, China has most of them in the world. Ukraine is rich in rare earth minerals, and the estimated value, according to Wall Street, is around 15 trillion. Trump asked Zelensky for 50% of that, plus he asked for any third-party contracts that Ukraine signs. Speaking of money transfers and how the U.S. wants to absorb capital, invest outside and then reabsorb capital, repatriate to strengthen the U.S. economy, back the U.S. economy, which you used to do that, by the way, in Latin America.
Yes,
from the 1920s on. From the 1920s on, the repatriate capital, decapitalize Latin America. Okay, so now it's over to Eastern Europe, to the Middle East. So decapitalization strategy is continuing.
Well, Europe is on the brink of capitulation, so they will be a slave for the American. They're a slave, right?
And this is the reason. That's an excellent point. This is the reason. Today, this morning here, morning for us, obviously 7-hour difference between me here and New York. The newly elected chancellor of Germany announced that Germany, and he made this announcement directing his comments to the Europeans. He said all of us have to decide whether we want to continue the dependence on the United States or break off this dependency relationship that we have. The dependency theory was made famous in Latin America. So Europe now feels like the Latin America of the United States.
No, it's completely right. But it's not going to be easy to cut off the dependency at this stage. You can begin. That's okay. Because what happens for America in the monetary policy is okay. If we'll cut the spending and raise the debt, now we have the Federal Reserve about the interest because for them it's very complicated. Okay, you are going to raise the interest, going to create inflation, and you know what happened when inflation is created, and several. So it's not quite easy. So tell us about that. You think it's going to be the interest rate be elevated, increased by the Federal Reserve?
The interest rates will be impacted as debt rises because the Federal Reserve needs to float bonds with higher yields. And one of the things that has been happening in the last 4 or 5 years is that foreign investment that was traditionally going to purchase bonds, treasuries, has gone to artificial intelligence companies like NVIDIA and other big companies, Oracle, Meta, Google, Amazon. And so the monies that used to go to that for the treasuries went to artificial intelligence and high-tech companies, Silicon Valley companies. And ever since the Chinese announced the big announcement with DeepSeek, the artificial intelligence company that can do it faster and cheaper, they claim, and will
Well,
so
yes,
far
I'll strip chat GPO, chat GPT, strip chat GPT.
Yes, yeah.
Easily.
So there is concern about the degree to which the Fed can attract that investment back. And as you pointed out, the yields is the spread is where the issue comes in. Now they raise that, then you have a problem at home, because that means that has an inflationary back with the American consumer. That means that you reduce already. There has been, in the last 5 years, there has been during the whole actually Biden administration, there has been inflationary pressures on the consumer at the retail level. The retail consumer index had been rising. If you look at the chart, it goes like this. I mean, during the Trump period, it hovered around 2%, then it goes up to 8%, and now it's beginning to come down a little bit. So this is the sort of thing that the challenge for the Fed. So this is a dilemma, and it's a difficult thing to solve.
I need money.
And the contradictions,
yes,
the contradictions in the policy.
I need money. I have to create bonds, to finance myself. I can create bonds with a very low and unattractive low rates, interest rate. Has to be attractive, and one reason to be attractive is to have high interest rate, because it's fiduciary business. Will be beneficial for the powerful people in the United States, but against the small companies, the small business, even the great chains that is not part of the powerful people who participate in that thing. So, but I finance my over debt. I finance my debt in a way.
There is an issue here with debt, and that is the fiscal structure. Debt is related to the fiscal structure.
Yes.
The fact is that the state has not been absorbing surplus capital that's out there. Instead, it's been pouring more of that surplus capital in the top 1% and in the top corporations, cutting corporate taxes. It was 90% under Dwight Eisenhower. The rate for corporate taxes, it's 21% today. It has been since Trump, the first Trump administration. So we went from 90% to 21%, and then there are all kinds of loopholes that didn't exist when Ike Eisenhower was around. And then on top of that, you have, for the richest people, 8% tax rate, and they have all kinds of loopholes, and they evade, not to mention tax havens around the world, so this is an issue. The government is not taking in surplus capital, and the corporations, by the way, it's not that they're, and there's no this is the problem with regulation. There's also this talk lately about Elon Musk and what he's doing. He is basically freeing Wall Street of more regulation, and this is counterproductive. All of this will have a very negative effect on the economy. The debt will rise for sure. No serious economist, and certainly the IMF is hardly, it's a conservative institution, so is the World Bank. They're both predicting US debt is going to really go way up, combined with a policy of tariffs that this individual has is hardly discriminatory on what countries he hits. It's everybody. It doesn't matter. It's Europe. It's Taiwan. It's not just China. Actually, if anything, he'll probably cut a deal with China and hit the rest, because China has the leverage for Trump to cut the deal, and he's a businessman. He understands that. And
Well,
so I see, I'm very pessimistic, in other words, about this issue that you're raising. I'm not optimistic. And, I read in the more pro-Trump press, and the Wall Street Journal this morning had an article. Oh, yeah, and the New York Post. Oh, well, all this alarmist talk about the debt and inflation, it's not that bad. We'll see a lot of growth under Trump, the golden age. Okay, let's wait and see.
well, it's quite bit. Well, let's talk about production, productivity, right? Because Trump is obsessed with tariffs. And he threats every country in the world with the tariffs, right? And there is a point, where, for example, with Mexico. Um, the president of Mexico, Claudia Sheinbaum, told him something quite real. Okay, you increased the tariff 25% for Mexican production, but even having the increase, all the goods produced by American company is still cheaper being produced here than in America, for example. And the same is in China and in other countries. So how are you going to handle and deal with that? Because it's not quite easy. The American took several years and decades, putting factories, all the machinery, all the strategy outside the United States, and they just remain with the fiduciary business, like a third world country do, right?
That what
The
you're
way.
raising is an excellent point, because it points to the contradictions of the broader policy of foreign trade policy of the United States, because here they were talking about decoupling and friendshoring. Mexico was supposed to be friendshoring. Now it's attacking Mexico. By the way, let's not forget Canada.
Yes,
Canada as
well,
well,
just for example, yeah.
which which is mystifying to me, but that's okay. I mean, that's fine, because there is no discrimination. He just hits at the America First policy of the Trump administration. The first administration is continuing now. It is indiscriminate. He hits at everybody. Now, with Mexico specifically, as you point out, there are hundreds of billions of dollars invested in the maquiladoras. The fact is that you have a lot of plants down there and a huge history going way back in the 90s, actually started in the 80s, even before that, slowly, and it really blossomed with NAFTA. And the economies of Mexico, capitalism, by the way, has always been an integrative economy. It's not based on a nation state. Capital goes wherever it realizes the highest return, and it's integrated. Take the automobile industry, which is very important to Mexico, and it's very important to the United States. There are parts. I worked in Indiana, and there were two plants there, and they were getting parts, assembly plants. They were getting parts from Mexico and Canada. So the parts come from different parts of the world, the auto parts. So for the assembly line, for the assembly plant. So you have basically an integrative economy, and you're saying, well, we're going to impose tariffs. And he's telling American corporations, you go down there, you go there, we'll hit you too. Come back.
Yes.
Bring it here. And so this is self-defeating. And one of the reasons that analysts and economists, journalists are alarmed about this is, at the end of the day, we have to ask the question. The products and services are made for the consumer, to be consumed, so the economy can roll along and we have GDP growth and so on. What is the point of all this? Because when you look at the history of tariffs, I recently did an article on this, from Truman to the present, they bring in less than 2% of receipts. They bring in a tiny, tiny percent of the tax receipts. It's an insignificant amount, and then they have a negative impact on the country that it's imposing tariffs. One last point, I got to get this in because this is an important point. Historically, countries that are in an advantageous position to place tariffs are the ones that do them, and that they see down the road, like the United States itself in the 19th century, when it was industrializing, it was imposing tariffs on the Europeans because it wanted its own industries to take off and grow. Okay, that's understandable. Now, in this case, U.S. has deindustrialized. It deindustrialized from Carter, from Jimmy Carter to the present. There is a diffusion of American industrial policy for the last 50 years. They have gone all over the world. And now they're trying to pick up the pieces through tariffs. And that's the part that's incomprehensible to me. And not just to me, but economists from the left to the right.
Well, we have the tariff that we have talked about it, and first there is another point. Is attempts against his goals to make American great and to have productions and to rise the productivity, immigration, right? Because if you deport the people, they handship, handship work. How hell you are going to produce goods cheap? Because you need people, and the American people is specialized, but it's costly. It's not going to give you their work for nothing. So honestly, John, I don't understand that. I don't know. See, why is the guy thinking how he's drinking or how he's eating? Because it's not possible. Okay, if one guy or two guys are criminal, okay, it's your right to deport it because they are not.
Yeah. That's a separate issue.
It's another issue. But people who are there is working there, and they can be useful for your production system. They're taken away. I don't get it. So
there have been scholarly studies conducted specifically about the labor migration from the 1920s coming up through the Rio Grande River and to the Reagan period, because the Reagan period, when neoliberalism was institutionalized, I agree with you, by the way, the foundations for neoliberalism started in the 1970s under Jimmy Carter, but it's institutionalized in the 1980s. Now, all of that period, from the 20s to the 80s, the studies that have been done indicate that one of the reasons that the United States experienced the era of Pax Americana, the rise of the American empire, the rise of American economic power, rising to superpower status after the Bretton Woods Conference in 1944, after World War II, one of the reasons is precisely because of labor migration, especially from Latin America. And the contributions that cohort, that group of people made to the American economy are immense, allowing the surplus profits to go into reinvestment in the American economy to expand. And they did it. They did this enriching American economy, enriching, by the way, the coffers, their tax receipts that the American government got all along. And so the issue boils down to one thing and one thing only: ideology. This is populism at its worst. It's a populist ideology. It's a distraction because they need to point to an enemy for the popular base of the GOP, and they just held that I think it was down in Atlanta. They held that conference, the CPAC organization, the
Yes.
Yeah, and they, the populist rhetoric is free flowing. There is a plethora of it, just a lot of populist rhetoric. But the essence, when you look at statistics, what you have is that to use the German word, the Lumpenproletariat segment and the unskilled labor force is where the biggest profits came from. These are the people that brought the biggest profits. That unskilled labor force is where they extracted the largest profits, and then they reinvested that. And you have the miracle of Pax Americana in the greatest, the superpower economy that the United States was. But then again, when you look at historically, and the Latin American governments, one after another, especially Mexico, complained during when the war broke out. The Roosevelt administration pleaded with them to cooperate and help the war effort. A lot of people don't realize the degree to which Latin America helped, the degree to which that labor that they complained all along, by the way, well, because they used it in populist rhetoric and for political ideological goals. When the war broke out and the U.S. had labor shortages, then they went to the Latin America. We need your help with because we have a labor shortage. Of course, they put women in the labor force, American women, but then they walked up, and the Latin American leaders, by the way, reminded them that they were discriminatory before, and that they should be more tolerant and appreciate the contributions that migrant labor offers to the national economy. So this is the incomprehensible. I mean, people want to buy lettuce for the cheapest. Let's take lettuce, which migrant workers pick, for the cheapest possible cost. Okay, but they don't want the migrant workers. They want construction for the cheapest possible cost, but they don't want the migrant labor. You see the contradictions in, I don't want the migrant labor, but I want to pay the lowest possible cost. This is the incomprehensible thing. There
now
is
it's
no
American
cohesive thinking.
methodology to pay the lowest cost, so the lowest fare for anything, right? And they have to offer that to immigrants, illegal immigrants, because a legal immigrant, an American will not accept that. Excuse me, if you want to improve the production, you need consumption, consumers, right? Otherwise, you are going to produce for what? For nothing. No, I don't see that. But that's the only, there are big issues and big contradictions in terms policies. I don't know if this is my question to you. If you see viable terms policies, terms ideas, will be American great?
The thing to me, I honestly, Marco, I believe that the United States has been undergoing a structural crisis, and I think that Trump is the face of the structural crisis. I don't believe in blaming one individual. I think this is a systemic problem. I think that the crisis comes from a flawed political economy model, and that's neoliberalism. Neoliberalism is a flawed model, and neoliberalism operates, it's like an umbrella that operates. It is possible for neoliberalism to operate under a liberal democratic regime or a far right wing regime. For example, Modi in India is an authoritarian neoliberal. Macron over in France is a liberal democratic neoliberal. So they're both neoliberals. They both believe in the same goals, but not in the same political strategy achieving those goals. The United States is moving toward the Modi model, is moving toward the authoritarian neoliberal model. What has been happening in the United States is a tragedy, as we're finding out in just 1 month now, with regard to the lengths to which the government is going to undermine the Constitution that the founding fathers, based on the principles of the Enlightenment, the principles of liberal democracy, undermining the federal workforce and destabilizing the entire labor movement. When I read just recently one statistic, 80% of the American workers, this is astounding, 167 or 170 million people are afraid. 80% of them are afraid they're going to lose their jobs because of what is happening, what Trump is doing with the federal workers, sending them emails, go find another job, submit your resignation. So they inculcate fear, and there's a sense of chaos, and the chaos filters down to the economy because let's take Washington, D.C. and the metro area. A lot of the federal workers and the federal agencies are spread throughout the United States, but let's just take Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C. has very expensive real estate. The whole real estate market now is walking on hot coals because they're concerned what's going to happen if Musk and Trump go through with these lofty goals of getting rid of half the workforce and handing the federal agencies to Silicon Valley to automate a lot of these agencies, secure hundreds of billions in contracts, high tech and artificial intelligence contracts. This is going to create a huge surplus labor force, undermine the local economy, and pockets of the local economies where Chicago is not, New York, where you are, there are a lot of government agencies.
Yes.
And this is destabilizing. So the politics of destabilization that the U.S. has practiced historically with regard to foreign policy, whether in Latin America or the Middle East, is now homegrown. It's now hit home with this government that's looking to transfer more money, more income from the bottom to the top.
Well,
and for what?
That you have spoken quite clearly in your book, your last book. Well, John, we are at the end of the meeting. Thank you for your attention. I think the next conversation will be about Argentina, that we create of the neoliberalism exposed in your book, quite understandable and clearly, right? William, we'll be for the next time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I thank you.
Bye then.
Bye-bye.